Hello, dear YouTube family, I'm Crime Whispers. I know many of you like to listen to these stories as you drift off to sleep. So before we begin, I'd love for you to leave a comment, letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like and subscribe now. Let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's case. It was Friday, November 25th, 2022. Thanksgiving weekend, 6:58 a.m. in Riverside, California. On a quiet cul-de-sac in Price Court, most families were still asleep. Recovering from the previous evening's festivities, Thanksgiving had been full of good food, laughter, and family. And for many, the weekend promised more of the same, relaxing, eating, and spending time together. Just before 7 a.m. a red Kia Soul pulled into the neighborhood. A man stepped out, dressed in a tan trench coat, black fedora, and a face mask. He carried a black duffel bag and a plastic bag. He wandered through the area, pausing briefly outside one house before returning to the car and driving off. He repeated this strange behavior twice. One neighbor found it unsettling enough to call the Riverside Police's non-emergency line to report the license plate, but since no crime had been committed, all the police could do was make a note of it 2 hours later. At 9 a.m., Michelle Blandon was heading out of her house when her phone rang. It was her mother, Sherry. Frantic and speaking quickly, a detective was at the house wanting to speak to Michelle's 15-year-old niece. Something urgent had happened near the school, and the detective needed to get hold of her immediately. Sherry, 65, lived in the home with her husband Mark, 69, a volunteer high school softball and baseball coach, her daughter Brooke, 38, and Brooke's 2 young daughters. Everyone's mind raced. Had the teen done something wrong? Was she in trouble? The detective explained he would need to interview the adults first, and the teen would have to wait in the car. He also requested that both Sherry's and Brooke's phones be left behind during the conversation. Heart pounded. Nothing about this felt normal, but she trusted her mother. Sherry wouldn't have let anyone inside if it weren't serious. A short while later, Brooke arrived to drop off her daughter. Michelle watched as Brooke and her teen drove off to Price Court. She called her mother again, asking if everything was okay. Sherry's voice trembled, and before she could respond fully, the detective took the phone. She heard him calmly reassure her mother, saying, "It's all going to be okay." Then came the unsettling request. The detective needed to search the teen's room, though one filled with Green Bay Packers memorabilia. Michelle felt sick. How could he possibly know what the inside of their home looked like? Before she could protest, Sherry said, "I'll call you back," and the line went dead with nothing else to do. Michelle tried to push the anxiety aside and headed into town at 11:08 a.m. 911 dispatchers received a call requesting a welfare check. At Price Court, neighbors had witnessed a man leaving a house with a visibly distressed young girl. She had no shoes on and was subtly trying to communicate with people nearby. Though they couldn't understand her words, the pair approached a red Kia Soul parked in a driveway at the same house that had reported the car earlier. The homeowner opened the door and shouted at the man that he couldn't park there. He apologized, claiming he would leave. The girl got into the back seat, and he placed a black duffel bag in the back passenger side. The neighbor noticed red stains on his clothes, which looked like blood, though she couldn't be sure. While the girl hadn't been physically forced into the car, something about the scene felt profoundly wrong. The scene was deeply troubling. Before the man shut the car doors, the girl quietly whispered, "Help me," and then the Kia sped away. Michelle, still out in town, received a Facebook message from a neighbor, "Please, call me ASAP." Moments later, more calls flooded the Riverside Police Department. Price Court was on fire. It was Mark and Sherry's house. Michelle jumped into her car with her husband, racing across town, repeatedly calling her mom, dad, and sister, but no one answered. When authorities arrived, the flames were already consuming the house. Windows began to shatter from the heat, and the roof started to collapse. Firefighters forced their way inside and made the horrifying discovery: the bodies of Mark, Sherry, and Brooke lying close together near the front door. Each had a plastic bag over their head, and all were bound and gagged. They were already dead. Neighbors watched in disbelief as the bodies were carried out. Michelle and her husband arrived just as police were securing the scene. She tried to run through the tape, but officers held her back. Her parents' and sister's cars were still outside, though it was too early to confirm identities. She soon learned that multiple bodies had been recovered. Shaken, Michelle went to the station with police. Other officers were tracking the red Kia. She recounted the strange phone calls from that morning, the detective who had been inside her parents' house, and how impossible it seemed for the man to have gained entry without showing ID. Her mother would never have let him in otherwise. When Michelle mentioned her father's tattoos, one arm with a Green Bay Packers logo, the other with a Notre Dame mascot, the grim reality sank in. Her mother, father, and sister were dead, and her niece was missing on that Friday morning. Riverside police were first called to the home for a disturbance. Soon after, neighbors reported. The firefighters would later make the grisly discovery. Friends and neighbors, still in shock, visited the home to leave candles and pay tribute. They were the most loving people you could ever meet. One neighbor said, "Every neighborhood needs a family like the Winnecks. They were all American, loving, and caring." The tragedy left the community in disbelief. The family had lived there for 22 years, despite initial assumptions that the fire caused their deaths. Autopsies revealed a far more horrifying truth. Mark, Sherry, and Brooke had likely died of asphyxiation. They had been bound and gagged before. Plastic bags were placed over their heads. Brooke's throat had been slashed, and the sequence of injuries indicated Mark was killed first. Brooke had fought fiercely against her attacker. Tragically, 3 of the family's dogs and their pet, Bird, also perished in the fire. Only one dog, who had been in the backyard, survived and was taken into a shelter until a new home could be found. While this nightmare unfolded in Riverside, over 2,000 miles away in Virginia, another story was quietly beginning. A woman was filing a missing persons report. Her boyfriend of 5 years had disappeared. They had spent Thanksgiving together in San Diego with her parents, but he suddenly announced he had run out of vacation time and needed to drive back to Virginia, where he had purchased a house. She had no reason to doubt him until she realized he hadn't gone to Virginia at all. He had set off for Riverside, California, and he had the missing 15-year-old girl with him. Using the license plate the neighbor had previously reported, Riverside police were able to track the red Kia as it drove into a remote, rural road in Kelso, an unincorporated area of San Bernardino County, with nothing around for miles. A SWAT team and helicopter closed and the man finally pulled over, but instead of surrendering, he jumped out of the car. Firing his weapon, he showed no intention of backing down. A shootout erupted in a matter of seconds. As the girl ran from the car, the driver was dead, and the teen was safely in police custody. Most reports indicate that he turned the gun on himself, though some suggest he may have been struck by police fire. The 15-year-old, whose name has never been released, was alive and unharmed. She was immediately taken into protective custody and, along with her sister, began a long process of trauma counseling. A GoFundMe campaign raised over $100,000. Intended to support the girls through recovery. Rochelle praised the neighbor, who had diligently reported the license plate that morning, saying their persistence likely saved her niece's life. The man responsible for the kidnapping and triple homicide was identified as 28-year-old Austin Lee Edwards, a serving Virginia State Deputy Sheriff. To investigators' surprise, the team revealed that she had actually known Austin, having met him online, but he was not who she thought he was. Their communication had begun on Ogle, a free chat site that connects users randomly in one-on-one sessions, allowing them to remain anonymous. Users communicate as you and stranger. The teen had been honest about her age. While Austin claimed he was 17, it is unknown whether he was pretending to be someone else in photos or messages. Could not determine exactly how long the two had been in contact, or how Austin obtained her home address at some point. He had requested sexual photographs from her, which prompted her to stop communicating with him. Detectives theorized that the murder of her family could have been retaliation, or an attempt to prevent her from telling anyone about his behavior. They also could not rule out the possibility that he had obtained explicit images of her, making this a potential case of sextortion. His messages revealed a clear obsession, suggesting he would stop at nothing with over 1 million pages of social media content to sift through. The full story was expected to take time to emerge. In Riverside, the community gathered outside the Winnick family home on Price Court, holding vigils for the family killed the day after Thanksgiving. At one vigil, the teen thanked the neighborhood for their support. Members of the Arlington High School baseball team, coached by Mark Winnick, attended as well. The team tweeted, "The world won't know what he meant to us." Students and athletes shared personal memories, describing how he would stay after practice to talk to them and always looked out for them. One student recalled, "One of my favorite memories is when my sister hit a walk-off, and he gave us both a big hug after the game. We're here to support her and the rest of the family as they navigate this unimaginable loss." Joy, a local organizer of a candlelight vigil, remembered Mark as a watchful presence in the neighborhood, saying, "I feel so much sorrow for the family. I wish I could do more." Investigators confirmed that after setting the home on fire, Austin had fled with another relative. It remains unclear whether she went willingly, but the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department reported she was safe following a pursuit near Needles on Friday afternoon. During the chase, Austin reportedly fired at deputies before being killed by law enforcement. Both agencies investigating the case expect to release more details soon. Meanwhile, the family began organizing fundraisers for the funerals of Mark, Sherry, and Brooke. The teen later recounted her experience that morning following Brooke's instructions. She had waited in the car outside her home, but eventually stepped out for air as it became too hot. Tentatively, she walked inside, only to see her grandmother, Sherry, tied up with a bag over her head, still moving slightly. Before she could process anything, Austin appeared, pointing a gun and ordering her to leave with him, where he drove her. And what was said during that time remains unclear. Now dead, Austin could not answer for himself. So who was Austin Lee Edwards? Austin had joined the Virginia State Police Training Academy in July 2021. The academy provides new troopers with 1,300 hours of combined classroom and field instruction, covering more than 100 subjects. He graduated a year later and was assigned to Henrico County within the Richmond Division. Governor Glenn Youngkin, speaking at the commencement, welcomed the new troopers and expressed his excitement for their service to the Commonwealth. Austin Lee Edwards resigned from the Virginia State Police after only a few months, though no official reason was listed in his personnel file. A month after leaving, he was still associated with the Washington County Sheriff's Office and soon joined the Patrol Division as a Virginia State Deputy Sheriff just under 2 weeks before his cross-country drive to California. Austin had purchased a home in a small town of fewer than 2,000 residents. Neighbors described him as friendly, and many felt a sense of safety, knowing he was a law enforcement officer. However, Austin spent much of his time blacking out windows in his home. Less than 10 days after moving in, Austin Lee Edwards, the Winnick family, and their pets would all be dead. In another state, developing news out of Riverside revealed that last week, 3 family members had been found murdered, their home set ablaze. Investigators linked the killings to a catfishing scheme carried out by 28-year-old Edwards. Authorities say he posed as a teenager online, forming a relationship with the teen daughter of one of the victims. He then drove across the country, allegedly murdering her mother and grandparents, and attempting to abduct her. Neighbors and acquaintances in Virginia expressed shock. One said, "I never imagined anything like this. He was very happy-go-lucky, and I felt safe knowing he was an officer." Records indicate that Austin had also purchased a home in Saltville from Jacob Gordon, who described the transaction as unusual. He only saw the property through a video. He blacked out the windows and requested video footage of the basement before buying it. Seemed really weird. Another neighbor noted Austin had a strange, almost creepy presence. rarely leaving his home and setting off alarms soon after moving in. Gordon, still processing the news from California, said, "It doesn't feel real. Something like this, you just never expect it. He's a predator." Plain and simple, investigators believe Austin acted alone in the murders, and in setting the fire. The case highlights the dangers of online deception and catfishing, which occurs daily across the country. Parents are urged to monitor devices, set parental controls, and remain vigilant. Many expressed disbelief at Austin's position in law enforcement, saying, "We don't even feel comfortable associating him with the police." This isn't what law enforcement is about. As the investigation unfolded, a woman in Washington scrolling through Instagram froze when she saw a photo of Austin. She revealed she had her own experience with him years ago. At 13, she met Austin, then 20, on Ogle. He had groomed, stalked, and harassed her for years. Now 21, she reported her story to police, providing nearly 4,000 messages from their interactions. The messages revealed a disturbing pattern. Austin ignored her, age pressured her for sexual photographs, professed love, and described self-harm on one occasion. He insisted she join him on Skype when she resisted. He responded with manipulative statements like, "There's no obstacle that's going to stop us from being together if that's what we both want. It doesn't even matter if you're 14 and not technically allowed yet." She eventually cut ties, but he continued attempting contact. The messages also revealed a critical red flag in 2016. After the teen told him she no longer wanted to communicate, Austin was detained for psychiatric evaluation. He had threatened to take his own life and harm his father. Police were called to the home by Austin's father, Christopher, who was found restraining him on a kitchen floor covered in blood. Christopher also had bite marks across his arms. Officers prepared to intervene with a taser, but the situation escalated further. Stan's father tried desperately to protect him, but ultimately law enforcement had to intervene. Austin was handcuffed, strapped to a stretcher, and checked into a hospital. At the time, he claimed he had been lashing out after an argument with his girlfriend, the 14-year-old girl he had been relentlessly pursuing online, despite being blocked on multiple accounts. Austin had created new profiles to continue harassing her. This pattern continued for years, until she turned 18, abruptly stopping, though it remains unclear whether this coincided with him meeting the 15-year-old in Riverside. Investigators noted that the timeline suggested it was a possibility when Austin was sent to a mental health hospital in 2016. The presiding judge noted there was a substantial likelihood that as a result of mental illness, he could seriously harm himself or others. The judge also stripped him of his gun rights under Virginia law, which prohibits anyone detained under a temporary detention order and admitted to a treatment facility from purchasing or possessing firearms until the court restores those rights. Austin's gun rights were never reinstated. Despite this, when he applied to the Virginia State Police Academy, Austin disclosed that he had voluntarily checked himself into a mental health facility. This required him to undergo a full mental health evaluation and examine evaluation. He ultimately failed, yet using his father, a close friend, and his field training officer as references, he was still accepted. The Virginia State Police, ALLEGEDLY, buried the results of his mental health assessment and conducted no further review of this aspect of his application. Interim police chief of the Aurora, Colorado Police Department, and a nationally recognized policing expert, remarked, "I'd have to ask a lot of questions about why he moved so quickly. That's very unusual. Most departments wouldn't hire someone with such a brief work history without enrolling them in their own academy first." As the investigation continued, Michelle and her family were frustrated by the lack of accountability. The Washington County Sheriff commented, "It is shocking and sad to the entire law enforcement community that such an evil and wicked person could infiltrate law enforcement while concealing his true identity as a computer predator and murderer." Meanwhile, the Virginia State Police maintained that Austin had shown no red flags, describing him as friendly, helpful, and without complaints. Disciplinary actions or use overforce incidents, Michelle noted that not a single department had issued an apology or acknowledgement to her family during this period. A public statement. Michelle shared her grief and her warnings to parents. Good morning, and thank you to everyone for being here today. My family and I truly appreciate the love and compassion we've received in this trying time. If something like this horrific tragedy can happen in our community, it can happen anywhere. This tragedy started with an inappropriate online relationship between a predator and a child parents. Please know your child's online activity. Ask questions about who they are talking to, and monitor their devices. Anybody can pretend to be someone else, and that could put your family in danger, she continued. We find some solace that this person will never harm anyone again, but we do not applaud his death. He was an adult who traveled across the country to kidnap a 15-year-old our niece, our family member he took an oath to protect, and he failed. He preyed on the most vulnerable. Michelle emphasized the real dangers of catfishing, which is often glamorized in media. When you hear catfishing, you think of a dating show or celebrity story, but in this case, it led to the deaths of the three most important people in my life. Parents and guardians, please use our story as an example. Teach your children about the consequences of online actions, not out of fear, but to guide them. She also asked the community to continue supporting her two young nieces, now motherless, as they navigate a difficult future eventually. The Virginia State Police issued a statement, calling Austin's hiring an isolated incident, citing human error resulted in an incomplete database query during Edward's hiring process. They stated that had they known about his past, he would never have been hired. Riverside Police Chief Larry Gonzalez added, "This is yet another horrific reminder of the predators existing online who prey on our children. If you've already spoken to your kids about online safety, have the conversation again. If you haven't, start now. Protecting them is paramount." Following these revelations, Governor Glenn Youngkin requested a full investigation into the Virginia State Police's hiring process, conducted by the state's watchdog agency in an unusual arrangement. The agency later allowed the Virginia State Police to investigate themselves. Meanwhile, Michelle and her family filed a notice of intent to sue, citing gross negligence, negligent hiring, breach of mandatory duties, and other violations of Virginia law. Their attorneys estimated the family's damages exceeded $100 million. Although Austin Edwards was deceased and could no longer provide information, police continued to comb through his laptop, phones, and online accounts to determine if there were additional victims. With over 1 million pages of messages already reviewed from just 2 people, investigators warned that the full scope of his crimes might never be known. Mark, Sherry, and Brooke, along with their beloved pets, died in the most horrifying way imaginable, bound, gagged, and trying to protect one another. Michelle reflected on the impact Mark had on the children he coached, shaping their futures and leaving lasting memories. Neighbors remembered him as a tireless, kind-hearted man who would mow lawns and lend a hand whenever he could. Sherry loved family celebrations, from Thanksgiving to Christmas, baking treats and creating joyful moments. Michelle recalled a small, heated debate over whether Sherry's brownies should be frosted with sprinkles or left plain, unaware that it would be the last time she would see her parents and sister alive. Brooke, a single mother, took pride in her daughter's accomplishments, from joining the color guard at school to collecting Starbucks cups, sharing those joys with her family. For Michelle and her nieces, every holiday, birthday, and family celebration would forever be tinged with the pain of their loss. In a moving tribute, Price Court in Riverside was ceremoniously renamed Winnick Court, situated next to the family home. Eric, Mark's nephew and godson, reflected. Mark and Sherry's pride and joy were their children and, by extension, their grandchildren. You never saw them beam so brightly as when they were around. Their family transitioned to Story 2. This next case differs from those previously covered on Truly Criminal. For this episode, we filmed on location and spoke with people connected to the case. This episode is a collaboration with Naomi from The Real Podcast, an award-winning television producer Naomi's podcast is distinguished by its depth, empathy, and insistence on asking the difficult questions truly, seeking the truth if you want an extended dive with interviews and insider perspectives. Check out the Real Our second story, begins far from Riverside, across the Atlantic, in Blackpool, northwest England, but the origins trace back to the Midland city of Coventry. A city of extraordinary history, Coventry is renowned for its cathedral, destroyed during World War II, and the subsequent rebuilding earned it the title City of Peace and Reconciliation. Coventry also left its mark on the music scene, becoming a hub for the 1970s two-tone movement, with bands like The Specials achieving international recognition. This story begins on March 25, 1989, when Karen D.S. and her husband Robert, known as Bob, welcomed their daughter Charlene. Their third child, Charlene, joined two older sisters, Rebecca, Becky, and Emma, and would later be followed by a younger brother. Robert Charlene was known as a music lover, an animal enthusiast, and a cheeky, playful presence in the family. Karen and Bob had married on May 2, 1987, in a church in Hillfields, just north of Coventry city center. Hillfields was one of the city's more deprived areas, known for antisocial behavior and crime, providing a challenging environment for a growing family. Life in the Downs household was often chaotic and dysfunctional. The family frequently had run-ins with both the police and social services. Neighbors and acquaintances alleged that Bob struggled with alcohol and could exhibit serious violence and aggression toward his children. A 1989 court document revealed that the family had been investigated by social services and West Midlands police after a convicted rapist was found with 3-year-old Emma in his car, unsupervised, and had also been present in the Downs family home. Bob was advised never to allow this individual back into the home, yet he continued drinking with him at a local pub. Police conducted a video interview with Emma to determine if more abuse had occurred, but she disclosed nothing at the time. In 1993, Emma moved in with her grandfather and his wife, only returning to the family home in 1997. Shortly after her return, allegations of sexual assault were made against a family friend, allegations that Charlene herself would later confirm. This friend was trusted to take the children to school. Yet social service reports suggested that Karen and Bob were aware of the abuse and failed to act when Charlene was 9. She alleged that this family friend had forced himself on her, fearing the risk of the children being removed from the home, or the potential prosecution for neglect. The family moved in 1999 from Coventry to Blackpool. Blackpool, often associated with bright lights, arcades, the beach, and the famous Blackpool Tower and Tower Ballroom, attracts thousands of tourists every year. But beneath the facade of tourist attractions and the famous illuminations, the town has its struggles. Large sections of Blackpool are deprived, with high unemployment, poverty, and the sixth alcohol-related death rate in England. Despite the move, concerns about the children's welfare persisted. Charlene, Emma, and Becky were placed in foster care after expressing that they no longer wanted to stay at home. However, this placement was short-lived, and the children were returned in 1999. Social services noted ongoing domestic violence in the home, and by the end of that year, the children were placed on the at-risk register. By early 2000, 11-year-old Charlene was frequently staying in different homes. She showed social services workers bruises from being beaten by her parents and reported abuse. By March, her school raised concerns as she repeatedly failed to attend classes. In June, hospital examinations suggested Charlene had been sexually abused, and she alleged that her father had thrown her across a room in a fit of violence. Over the next year, she would make 13 visits to a sexual health clinic with her grandmother, often displaying bruising, including on her inner thighs. Social services also raised concerns about Emma being exposed to older men in the household. In September 2000, Bob moved out to appease authorities, taking Charlene and her younger brother Robert with him, against the wishes of social services. By 2001, Suspicions arose that a male was sharing a bed with Charlene in the family home, Becky and Charlene continued to allege. Bob's excessive drinking and inappropriate sexual behavior by men he allowed into the house, in one incident in August. Health visitors found Charlene in bed with an older man. Counting money, Bob and Karen dismissed the situation, claiming he was just a family friend. Becky would move out a month later. Over a 15-year period, at least 16 men who had committed various offenses against minors had access to the Downs family homes in both Coventry and Blackpool. Bob and Karen consistently denied allowing predators to stay. Yet Bob's frequent pub visits facilitated connections with men who would later pose serious threats to the children. During one such visit, he met a man named Ray Monroe, whom he invited into the household. Back at the Downs household, Ray Monroe ended up staying on the property. Monroe was a convicted sex offender, having been sentenced to 4.5 years in prison for 4 counts of sexual assault against young girls. Bob and Karen claimed they were unaware of his criminal record, believing instead that he had only assaulted an ex-girlfriend. Despite this, they allowed him into their home. One of Bob's friends, Glenn, recalled seeing Bob invite various men from the pub into the house, and even saw Charlene sitting on Monroe's lap. Glenn said he voiced his concerns, insisting that what he was witnessing wasn't right. In 2003, Charlene visited a walk-in health center 3 times. Karen claimed she didn't know Charlene had gone to the clinic, nor was she aware that Monroe was staying in their home, even after moving to a new part of the country. The family's life remained fractured and difficult. In November 3, 2003, authorities were alerted about Charlene in a police call. Her father described her as a 14-year-old girl with shoulder-length dark brown hair and a fringe, wearing a black jumper with white diamond patterns. The police immediately searched the family home, but found no trace of Charlene or any clues as to her whereabouts. Investigators needed to reconstruct her movements. Working backward from that point, what follows is a timeline of Charlene's last known movements, compiled from the Lancaster Police timeline and supplemented by information from Renee Crompton, who runs the Justice for Charlene DS campaign. While details differ slightly between sources, the general path is as follows. November 1st, 2003, 3:25 p.m. Charlene and Becky walked down Bank Street to the Coral Island Arcade. Charlene's friend, Tasha, confirmed seeing her there. Charlene returned home briefly before heading out again later in the evening. It is believed she and Becky visited the nearby McDonald's around 6:45 p.m. They went to Church Street, where they allegedly met Karen, handing out leaflets for her restaurant job. Charlene then went to a phone box on Leopold Grove, said goodbye to her mother, and left with friends, reportedly receiving money from Karen. Charlene spent some time with friends before heading to Corn Street. The details of the next hour are unclear, but she is believed to have met another friend at 9:30 p.m. Charlene and her friend Tyne went to the Carousel Bar, where men reportedly bought them drinks. Tyne lost sight of Charlene afterward and never saw her again. The last reported sighting, according to police, was in an alleyway off Abington Street at around 11 p.m. This alley was known in Blackpool as a shortcut for young girls to access shops through back entrances. Charlene, who had been expelled from school, was lacking structure and routine, which meant she spent increasing amounts of time in town in the alleyways as the investigation began. No sign of Charlene emerged. Missing person posters went up, but the trail quickly grew cold, leaving authorities and the community desperate for leads. More than a year later, in November 2004, the case took a dramatic turn. A local businessman, David Cassidy, came forward with a disturbing claim. Cassidy supplied slot machines to shops in the area and said a man named Tar had told him that his brother, Ayad Albatiki, had confessed to murdering Charlene. Tar also alleged that another man, Mohammed Raver, had helped cover up the crime. Maravir, originally from Iran, owned and operated Funny Boys fast food on Dixon Road and knew Cassidy through his business. One of his employees, Ayad Elbetki, originally from Jordan, was also a friend and tenant, seeing a potential breakthrough. Police asked Cassidy to wear a concealed microphone to speak with Tar again, hoping to record further details about Charlene's disappearance and the alleged confession. The conversation between David Cassidy and Tar had been recorded, but in the recording, Tar claimed he never made the statements attributed to him. Calling the claims false later, police would insist they had never actually seen or heard this recording. In January 2005, authorities searched Mohammed Ray's home but found nothing significant on February 22nd. Both Mohammed and Ayad Albatiki were brought in for informal questioning during this time. Wiretaps were installed to monitor their conversations as part of a covert operation. In one recorded exchange, Mohammed was heard joking with a friend about David Cassidy, suggesting he should be killed and turned into a kebab. Mohammed laughed and added, "Yeah, make a fake little kebab," showing the dark humor behind the conversation. During the investigation, a woman whose identity is protected came forward with a harrowing account. She said she had visited Funny Boys for a coffee after drinking elsewhere, and later woke up naked in the upstairs flat. She could not remember how she had ended up there, and quickly got dressed, fleeing down an alley when a man called to her, holding money in his hand. She reported the incident to police, who allegedly told her that Ayad Albatiki was responsible and had raped her while filming the act. Two officers, Jan Besant and Dawn Fraser, reportedly asked her to make claims she was unsure of, but she refused, and no investigation or charges followed. Over for weeks, the covert recordings produced 52 CDs, but officers later described them as too distorted to be usable. Detective Sergeant Jan Besant, one of the officers on the case, volunteered to transcribe the tapes. She spent the next 2 years doing this, while also managing the takeaway business Mohammed had run. Mohammed had previously been a foster father to vulnerable children in Blackpool. One former foster daughter said there was nothing untoward about him, providing no incriminating evidence. However, another ex-foster daughter would later accuse him of sexual assault. Mohammed lived just 2 doors down from Dawn Fraser, another officer on the Charlene case. Mohammed claimed that Dawn's wife had made a pass at him after complaining about her husband's performance, which he refused, causing tension between Mohammed and Dawn. Dawn's account differed. He alleged the relationship had soured after he heard Mohammed had shown pornographic material to underage girls. Mohammed denied these allegations entirely, with no trace of Charlene. Police escalated the case from a missing person inquiry to a murder investigation on March 17, 2006. 2 arrests were made. Ayad Albatiki was charged with Charlene's murder, and Mohammed Raver was charged with helping dispose of her body. The trial began in May 2007 at Preston Crown Court. The prosecution claimed that either Mohammed or Ayad had a sexual relationship with Charlene, which they were allegedly trying to conceal. Both men denied ever knowing her, let alone having such a relationship. Witnesses testified seeing Charlene at the takeaway and reported inappropriate behavior toward young girls. Emma D.S. described Ayad as a creep, noting his misconduct in nightclubs. The police also cited multiple prior allegations of sexual assault against Aya. Muhammad's house had been thoroughly searched, with carpets and floorboards removed, yet no DNA or evidence was found. Mohammed contended that there was nothing there to find in the first place. The defense requested the audio recording of David and Tar's conversation, which police initially claimed could not be located. When it was eventually found, the CD was heavily scratched, making it allegedly unplayable. Jan Besant later suggested that had the audio been properly logged, approval for searching Mohammed's home and placing recording devices might never have been granted. Dawn Fraser claimed that although his account was used to enter the CD into the system, it was not him, and that he had been framed by someone else using his computer. Loon later reflected on the discovery of the CDs from 2005, saying, "To say my heart sank when I heard this tape is an understatement. I didn't know anything about these recordings. I have no idea what happened during the trial. The covert recordings were played in court, with Detective Sergeant Jan Besant's transcriptions displayed as captions at trial. Claims were made, suggesting that after Charlene had been murdered, her body was dismembered, placed in kebabs at the takeaway, and that her bones had been ground into grouting. However, there was no evidence to support any of these claims. Despite this, the narrative was repeated in public discussions of Charlene's case, reducing her story to a sensationalized urban legend rather than a real victim. After both the defense and prosecution presented their cases, the jury deliberated for 49 hours but failed to reach a verdict. The jury was formally discharged on September 15, 2007. A memorial for Charlene was held, funded by the far-right British National Party. Meanwhile, the Independent Police Complaints Commission (IPCC) launched an inquiry into the investigation, finding it had been handled unprofessionally. 2 officers faced disciplinary action, though one was later cleared of wrongdoing. In April 2008, a retrial was ordered, but it quickly collapsed. The Crown Prosecution Service, upon re-examining the evidence, found serious issues with its reliability. The covert recordings were deemed poor in quality, and Jan Besant's transcriptions were criticized as inaccurate. Mohammed Raver's lawyer, John Bramley Davenport, argued that Besant was not qualified to transcribe the tapes. An expert who re-examined the recordings agreed, noting that the tapes were not of sufficient quality to serve as evidence. Some transcriptions even misrepresented key phrases. For example, burial place was argued to have actually been Paul's place, referring to a friend Muhammad had visited, as confirmed by a GPS tracker on his car. Forensic audiologist Elizabeth Mellon stated that Besant's transcripts should never have been used in court. Citing cognitive priming, she explained that the transcriber appeared biased, influenced by prior knowledge of the case, which could mislead the jury. As a result, both Ayad al-Batiki and Mohammed Raver were released. With charges dropped, they were acquitted and awarded £250,000 in compensation. Mohammed described the ordeal as shameful. Having spent more than 2 years on remand, he explained that David Cassidy, who had made the statements that triggered the police investigation, had previously worked for him but was fired for poor performance. Angered, Cassidy allegedly harassed Mohammed and vandalized the shop, escalating tensions that contributed to his police statements. In 2011, Jan Besant was found guilty of 2 counts of misconduct and forced to resign. Lancaster Police stated that her conduct had let everyone down, while IPCC Commissioner Nassim Malik described the investigation as handled poorly and unprofessionally. Superintendent Simon Giles emphasized that the force expects the highest professional standards, which had not been met. Besant later appealed, and the British Arbitration Tribunal overturned the resignation ruling, recommending her reinstatement. Years past, tourists continued to visit Blackpool, but Charlene remained missing by then. It had been 8 years since her disappearance. Investigators found that more than 60 teenage girls had been groomed by individuals working in various takeaway shops across the town. Charlene's friend, Tasha, said she had witnessed grooming firsthand and had also been groomed herself. Other friends, Martin and Sean, recalled seeing Charlene enter takeaway shops and return with cigarettes, money, or alcohol. Her friend Tyne also described trading sexual contact for cigarettes, money, or drugs. In the alleyways of the town, Charlene would often act as a lookout in the alleyways, watching for police, while her friend Tyne gave her money for doing so. 10 years ago, she was last seen in a bar on the North Pier, sipping a vodka and coke before disappearing into a maze of arcades and kebab shops, never to be seen again. The tragedy left a lasting impact, with one observer noting, "It's something I wouldn't wish on anyone. Losing one of your own is devastating enough, but even 10 years on, it still feels like yesterday." Over the years, Charlene's case became a cause célèbre for far-right groups who blamed Muslim grooming gangs. BNP leader Nick Griffin and other activists called for a public inquiry into the failures of authorities to protect young girls. Yet the list of potential suspects spanned the social spectrum, including individuals connected to Charlene's family. Lancashire police faced heavy criticism for flawed investigations, including incoherent covert recordings. The inquiry has since been reopened, with links drawn to the 2007 disappearance of 15-year-old Paige Shivers, another victim of grooming on the Blackpool seafront. Both girls were victims of child sexual exploitation in the same area, and their cases share strikingly similar profiles. Exploitation continued unchecked for years, under the bright lights of arcades and takeaway shops, and Charlene and Paige were likely just part of a larger pattern, with police estimating up to 60 potential victims. Paige Shivers, like Charlene, vanished from Blackpool, and her case eventually led to the conviction of Robert Ewing, who was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 33 years for her murder. Ewing, a self-confessed neo-Nazi, had previously been convicted of gross indecency and indecent assault against a 12-year-old in 2014. He killed Paige after she threatened to report their sexual contact to the police. Meanwhile, Charlene's disappearance remained unsolved in 2016. A cold case team was assigned to her investigation and discovered previously unreleased CCTV footage. The footage showed Charlene and her sister, Becky, walking on the day she vanished. This material was released publicly in November to generate new leads, and a Crime Watch appeal followed in 2017 on the 13th anniversary of her disappearance in August 2017. Charlene's parents, Karen and Bob D.S., sued Lancashire police over their handling of the case and the CCTV footage. That same year, a man named Nigel Lloyd, a chef in Blackpool, who had previously appeared on Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares, was arrested on suspicion of involvement in Charlene's disappearance. Lloyd had been convicted of attacks on two 15-year-old girls in 2001 and 2003 and sentenced to over 5 years in prison. His flat overlooked the alleyway Charlene frequented, and Tyne described him as a creep who knew Charlene and her family. He was released after 2 days, and no charges were ever filed linking him to Charlene. In November 2018, Bob and Karen appeared on The Jeremy Kyle Show, a controversial British talk show known for lie detector and DNA tests. The discussion, initially meant to focus on Charlene's case, devolved into confrontations about their marriage. That same year, Karen D.S. published a book titled Sold in Secret, detailing Charlene's disappearance. Charlene's brother, Robert, passed away on the 4th of December, found by Bob in a pool of blood at 11:30 p.m., hours earlier. He had complained of feeling unwell. The family reported that Robert had been deeply affected by Charlene's disappearance and had never fully processed or recovered from the trauma at the subsequent inquest. It was ruled that he had died of an accidental drug overdose. It also emerged that Bob and Karen had delayed calling an ambulance for nearly 3 hours, explaining that they had fallen into a state of panic and anxiety. In November of the following year, Charlene's friend Tyne died at the age of 32. An inquest determined her death was drug-related. In 2023, the case was reopened, led by Trinity University's Cold Case Unit, which partnered with Renee in hopes of finally solving Charlene's disappearance. Renee stated, "Our main aim is to review Charlene's case, identify where the failings occurred, and gather new evidence." Blackburn University also launched a major child sexual exploitation project across Lancashire to assess the scale of the issue and identify where children were being let down. Bob and Karen D.S. reported ongoing harassment from locals after it was revealed that predators, including Raymond Rowe, had stayed at their home. Bob maintained that he had no knowledge of Rowe's criminal history, and the family continues to reside in Blackpool. Unfortunately, Charlene's story is far from unique. Many young people continue to slip through the cracks, with those tasked to protect them failing to do so. An internal police report revealed that 11 takeaway shops in Blackpool town centre had been involved in the sexual exploitation of young girls, as reported by the BBC Investigations. By the Times, uncovered that police had initially identified over 100 individuals as persons of interest due to suspected abuse and exploitation of Charlene. Today marks the 20th anniversary of Charlene's disappearance, yet her case remains unresolved. The investigation is one of the longest running in Lancashire, with over 2,500 statements taken and more than 3,000 individuals interviewed, Renee emphasized. This is about achieving justice for a 14-year-old girl who had already endured so much in such a short time. The least we can do is continue to fight for her, she added. Charlene was failed by everyone who should have protected her. Police, social services, they all let her down. We're working to build a legacy and fight for real justice so she can be remembered positively. We hope that anyone with knowledge will come forward, so her whereabouts can finally be revealed and justice served. Story 3 shifts focus to Emily Grace Jones, born in Bolton on January 18, 2013. To Sarah and Mark, Emily was their only child. Mark worked as a credit manager, while Sarah was a solicitor. Emily was described as joyful and full of laughter, with a heart as big as her smile. She loved the outdoors, sports, and adventure, hiking, climbing, swimming, and horseback riding. Mark described her as a sociable daredevil, while her teachers praised her creativity, her leadership in class, and her ability to get along with everyone. Although Mark and Sarah were no longer together, they remained committed to co-parenting. On Sunday, March 22, 2020, Mother's Day, Mark was looking after Emily. They had planned to meet Sarah in Queen's Park that afternoon, around 2:15 p.m. Emily was riding her scooter energetically when she spotted her mother jogging nearby. She called out, "Daddy, Daddy, I want to go to Mom." And Mark allowed her to go. Mealy attempted to reach Sarah, who didn't hear her due to wearing headphones. As Emily scooted ahead, Mark noticed a woman rising from a bench and approaching his daughter. Moments later, Emily was on the ground. Initially, Mark assumed she had simply fallen, as he could hear her crying and saw the woman appearing to help her. Up nearby, witnesses began shouting in shock, realizing Emily had been stabbed. The woman, who'd up, briskly walked away with a knife in her hand. Mark ran to his daughter, who had suffered a catastrophic neck injury and was struggling to breathe. He desperately told her, "Just stay with me, Emily, stay with me, don't leave me." Sarah, still in the park, was unaware of the attack. Mark called her as a nurse nearby rushed over, trying to stabilize Emily, who was deteriorating rapidly. Among the people in the park at the time was Tony Canny, who was with his wife and baby daughter when he saw the woman with Emily attempting to flee the scene. He immediately gave chase, unsure whether she was armed, but determined to intervene. Tony's wife handed Mark her baby's muslin cloth, which he used to help stem Emily's severe bleeding. Emergency services arrived within minutes, and paramedics worked frantically to save her. The first paramedic on the scene found Emily unconscious, in cardiac arrest, and bleeding heavily. With her father holding her from behind, CPR was administered, and she was given adrenaline before being airlifted to the hospital. During the chase, Tony was informed by his wife that the woman had a knife, yet he continued to pursue her, prioritizing Emily's safety over his own. Tony tackled the woman to the ground, restrained her, and called 999 to report, "There's been an incident at Queen's Park in Boltana. Child is bleeding." The woman was visibly agitated, saying things like she no longer needed injections, that Tony had killed her family, and that he was killing her. Tony calmly replied, "You're not well. The police will help you," and held her until authorities arrived. Officers secured her, asking for the contents of her bag, and she was taken into custody. Her name was identified as 30-year-old Eliona Skarna, living at 19 Turnstone Road. Inside her bag were only personal items, including identification cards and a knife. A police cordon was established, and specialist officers began piecing together the events. Emily was transported to Salford Royal Hospital by air ambulance, arriving at 3:27 p.m. Despite ventilation, blood transfusions, and ongoing resuscitation, she remained in cardiac arrest. Tragically, At 3:56 p.m., all attempts to revive her failed and she was pronounced dead the following day. Her mother, Sarah, was tasked with formally identifying her daughter's body. Post-mortem revealed that Emily had died from a severe neck injury. Her family released a statement. "We are beyond devastated that this random act of violence means we will never see a beautiful little girl grow up. Emily was showing such promise, and it is truly heartbreaking to wake up to a world without her. We thank the members of the public who assisted in the park and express our gratitude to the emergency services for their efforts to save her, the local community, and Emily's school were left in shock." Her headmistress paid tribute, stating, "Emily was deeply loved and will be missed by all her friends and staff. Her loss leaves a hole in our hearts, and the school will never be the same again." Police quickly began building a profile of their suspect, the arrested woman. Eleona Skarna was detained under the Mental Health Act. Dr. Swantini Farrell, the on-call doctor at the time, reported that Eleona was cooperative but emotionally detached, stating she did not recall the events in the park, likely due to reluctance rather than memory loss. When arrested, Eleona was found with wires tied around her toes, which she claimed helped her manage her emotions. A doctor later noted that her attempt to retighten the wires indicated psychotic behavior. Eleona Skarna was born in February 1990 in Albania, according to her sister. Their father had accrued debts, leading to Eleona being forced into marriage with one of his creditors in February 2012, and they moved to Kuwait. She fled in September 2013, returning to Albania, and in 2014 left again for Frankfurt, Germany. On August 11th, Eleona's sister paid for her to travel to the United Kingdom. She was taken through Italy and France, entering the UK by lorry. 2 days later, on August 13th, Eleona applied to the Home Office for asylum, but her request was initially rejected. In June 2018, she successfully appealed, and her residency permit was extended, first until November 28, 2020, and later until November 2024. This was despite her later admitting to doctors that she had lied in her asylum application, falsely claiming to be a victim of sexual exploitation to improve her chances of remaining in the country. The Home Office has not confirmed whether they were informed of her admission. By March 2015, Eleona's mental health was deteriorating. A doctor assessed her with post-traumatic stress disorder and referred her for treatment. However, she did not attend her cognitive behavioral therapy sessions, and the case was subsequently closed in July of the same year. She grabbed a knife, believing she was about to be attacked. Her sister reported the incident, and Eleona was sectioned and admitted to Royal Bolton Hospital, where she was diagnosed with acute schizophrenia-like psychotic symptoms. She believed her neighbors were trying to harm her using electricity while hospitalized. Eleona frequently refused oral medication and was administered antipsychotic injections. She attempted to appeal her sectioning, but on August 20, 2018, it was determined she was well enough to be released, as her feelings of persecution had reduced following her release. Mental health workers visited her 1 to 2 times a week. She complained about the injections, citing side effects, and in November 2015, her medication was discontinued. Her condition soon worsened. By December 9th, she reported daily auditory hallucinations to doctors at Salford Royal Hospital. Her mother disagreed with the prescription of medication, believing she should not be medicated. In January 2017, Eleona refused visits from her care coordinator and missed scheduled appointments, concerned about her relapse. Her sister arranged for a mental health team to visit on February 13th. Before the visit could occur, Eleona committed a violent act. Her mother came to check on her and found Eleona attempting to harm herself. She then led her mother upstairs, chained the door shut, and said that once she killed her mother, everything would be okay. Eleona attacked her with an iron and stabbed her hand, but was stopped by a friend. She was subsequently arrested and detained under the Mental Health Act. Later emerged that Eleona had disconnected the boiler, removed light bulbs, and gotten rid of the television in her property. She again left the hospital without permission and went to a friend's house at 5 a.m., demanding to speak to their 13-year-old daughter. While armed with a knife she had taken from a restaurant, the mother refused her entry, and Eleona remarked she had cut her hair rather than cutting off heads. Police returned her to the hospital, and on May 4th, she was deemed fit for release following this. Her condition remained relatively stable. In March 2018, she requested to resume injections due to hallucinations, and the following year, she requested to switch to oral medication, while her family support helped manage her paranoia. She continued to avoid crowded places and wore sunglasses to avoid eye contact. Her last visit with a mental health worker was on March 11, 2020. It was so uneventful that no notes were taken. 11 days later, on March 22, 2020, Eleona would tragically take Emily's life around 1 p.m. She left her home and went to Bolton Town Center, purchasing a pack of 3 crafting knives from a pound shop, later admitting to a psychiatrist that she intended to use them to kill someone. A witness reported seeing a woman sitting cross-legged on the ground beside a bench, appearing agitated and vacant. The witness watched for about 4 minutes, but left. When she did not act, Emily, on her way to her mother Sarah, passed the bench suddenly. Eleona stood, grabbed Emily in a headlock, and launched a violent attack, stabbing her in the neck and slitting her throat. Police later searched Ellie's flat and discovered numerous antipsychotic medications and other items connected to her mental health. Eleona's flat was searched by police, where they discovered nearly a month's worth of antipsychotic medication that she had not taken. A doctor later testified that abruptly stopping such medication could cause a rapid deterioration in mental health. Within just a few days she was charged with murder and possession of a bladed article, and remanded in custody. Her preliminary murder hearing was scheduled for May 26 at Manchester and Salford Magistrates Court. During proceedings at Manchester Crown Court, Judge Richard Mantle QC expressed his condolences to Emily's family, saying to Mark, "I cannot imagine the level of pain you and your wife are experiencing. You have my personal and deepest sympathy, as well as that of everyone involved in the court process." Eleona appeared via video link from Rampton Secure Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility where she was being held. She initially entered a plea of guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Prosecutors were given 7 days to consider this plea, but ultimately decided to proceed with a murder trial at trial. The prosecution argued that it was for the jury to determine whether this was indeed a case of manslaughter or if Eleona was using her mental health condition as a convenient justification. Evidence presented showed that while in hospitals, she had spoken to a nurse in a way that suggested her actions had been planned, indicating premeditation rather than a spontaneous act of manslaughter. It also emerged that from mid-December 2019 until March 11, 2020, she had no face-to-face contact with mental health workers. Report read to the court stated that Eleona represented a very high risk of causing serious or potentially fatal harm to others while hospitalized. She had reportedly laughed hysterically at a child appearing on a television program and told a nurse, "Like I said, it's been 3 months, what do you want me to do, cry all the time?" She later admitted to the same nurse that the attack had been premeditated. She had waited in a park, selected her victim, carried out the attack, and then attempted to flee at that time. She was not taking her prescribed medication. The court also heard that, on July 30th, staff had observed Eleona exhibiting strange behavior, including telling nurses, "Your body is gone to your soul, and we're all going to die." Consultant psychiatrist Dr. John Crosby testified that Eleona suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, which caused delusions and a loss of touch with reality. He concluded there was no specific reason why Emily was targeted, stating, "It's such a terrible, rare, random attack. I can't think of another reason why it could have occurred." Emily's father, Mark, gave a statement to the court, saying, "I do not know why this happened. Emily was simply riding her scooter to her mom. She was a vulnerable child. Full of innocence and wonder, her future was cut short, and our future has also been taken away. How can we enjoy life when the best part of it has been stolen from us? A consultant forensic psychiatrist from the hospital where Eliona was detained advised that a conviction for murder was not realistic after reviewing the medical evidence. The prosecution agreed it would not be fair to ask a jury to convict her of murder. The murder charge was therefore withdrawn, and the jury was instructed to return a not guilty verdict on that charge. Eliona Skarner was subsequently convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Prosecutor Michael Brady, QC, stated, "This is not a decision taken lightly by the Crown. It was made carefully, mindful of the sensitivity of the case after reviewing all evidence. The Crown concluded there is no realistic prospect of conviction for murder. Eliona was sentenced to life imprisonment. With a minimum term of 8 years, she will initially be held at Rampton High Security Hospital for treatment, if deemed well enough to leave the hospital. She will serve the remainder of her sentence there." The judge emphasized that, despite her mental health condition, there was an element of culpability. She had made the conscious decision to purchase the knife and to kill someone. The judge expressed the profound impact of Eliona Skarner's actions, stating that the devastating consequences of her crime would remain with Emily Jones' parents, and undoubtedly others who knew her, forever. He acknowledged the impossibility of restoring Emily to her family or providing any true comfort for the immense loss they had suffered based on the evidence presented. The judge concluded that Skarner was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, and that the severity and nature of her condition warranted her detention in a secure hospital setting. Eliona Skarner will only become eligible for release once she has served her minimum term and is assessed as no longer posing a danger to the public, the judge warned. If you are never deemed fit for release, you will remain in hospital or prison for the remainder of your days. It was later reported that her minimum term had been revised from 8 years to 10 years and 8 months after the original sentence was determined to have been miscalculated, a mistake for which the judge took full responsibility in response to this revision. Emily's father, Mark, declared his unwavering determination. "I will keep fighting tooth and nail for her, to remain in custody for the rest of her life, whether it's 10 years or 20. It won't be enough for me, as far as I am concerned. She is a lifelong danger to the public. She would do it again to any child. I would bet my bottom dollar on that at the inquest into Emily's death." Acting Senior Coroner Alan Walsh reflected on the tragedy, saying, "In my 20 years as a coroner, this is one of the most heartbreaking cases I have ever dealt with. The loss of such a beautiful, innocent, lively, intelligent, and loving 7-year-old child under these circumstances is unimaginable." The coroner further acknowledged the broader implications of the case, noting that Emily's father was justified in feeling that her killer, an asylum seeker, should never have been allowed into the country. Emily Jones was attacked while riding her scooter through a Bolton park on Mother's Day in 2020. Her assailant, Albanian asylum seeker Eliona Skarner, had a long and well-documented history of mental health challenges. Despite Skarner being well known to mental health services, the coroner highlighted that local community teams could not have reasonably predicted or prevented the attack. He emphasized that, on a national level, gaps in mental health monitoring posed a real risk to future lives. The entire profession of psychiatry needs to be scrutinized. He said, "It's deeply concerning and shocking. We must continue to work diligently so that Emily's death does not happen in vain. We need to raise awareness of mental health issues, the dangers of relapse, and the consequences of inadequate monitoring." Coroner Timothy Brennan, reflecting on the systemic failings revealed by the case, announced he would issue a Regulation 28 report to the Secretary of State aimed at preventing future deaths. In his report, he intended to highlight serious concerns regarding morale, workloads, staff shortages, training deficits, and the lack of continuity of care within mental health services. He described the sector as being under immense operational pressure and stress, yet noted that Skarner's actions could not have been reliably predicted by her mental health team. Emily's father, however, strongly disagreed with this assessment. He asserted that those responsible for monitoring Skarner had failed to recognize the severity of the threat she posed. "It's shocking," he said. "And one of the most distressing aspects of everything that has happened, I've listened to so-called experts, and they all have different opinions. None of them truly understood the danger she represented during the inquest." It was revealed that Skarner had been deliberately concealing the deterioration of her mental state, meaning mental health workers were unaware that she had stopped taking her medication and was experiencing a relapse. Only in hindsight could her violent actions have been anticipated. Skarner's sister testified that in the days and weeks leading up to the attack, her condition had worsened. She had complained of hearing voices in her head and had previously attempted to attack both her mother and others. There were also instances where she had been found outside with a knife, screaming, and she had engaged in other alarming behaviors, such as cutting boiler pipes. Glora, her sister, described living with Skarner as like a horror movie. Reflecting the constant fear and tension in the household, she strongly disagreed with evidence presented by Skarner's consultant psychiatrist during the inquest, who had testified that she was stable and had shown no signs of psychotic relapse in the weeks and months prior to Emily's murder. Mark Jones, Emily's father, expressed his continued frustration after the inquest concluded, while relieved that the proceedings were over. He could not accept the coroner's finding that Skarner's threat had been unforeseeable. They didn't recognize how dangerous she was. He said that was their job. They may have been overworked or underfunded, but they were tasked with understanding and mitigating risks. The mental health services simply did not provide the level of care necessary. She was a dangerous person, and no one adequately addressed it. The inquest painted a harrowing picture of systemic failings and personal tragedy, highlighting the intersection of untreated mental illness, insufficient community monitoring, and devastating consequences for innocent lives. Emily's death underscored the urgent need for comprehensive reforms in mental health services, including adequate funding, robust training, continuity of care, and improved risk assessment protocols. The case also served as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of children and the responsibility of institutions tasked with safeguarding them. Ultimately, while the legal and medical systems continue to grapple with the lessons of Emily Jones' death, her family's advocacy, particularly Mark's relentless pursuit of accountability, ensures that the tragedy continues to drive conversations about mental health reform, public safety, and the protection of children in the community. The hope remains that through these efforts, no other family will have to endure the unimaginable loss that Emily's parents have suffered. Mark Jones was adamant that there was no excuse for the failings in dealing with dangerous individuals like Ileana Skarner. "I don't feel like I've got closure," he said. "I want to change the system. It's my daughter, and it's down to me to make this right." Following the inquest, Mark's lawyer highlighted that Skarner had twice admitted to doctors that she lied in her asylum application. She had also told doctors and police in 2015 and 2017 that she wanted to return home, yet the Home Office offered no explanation for why these warning signs were ignored. A spokesperson from the Home Office responded, stating, "We are carefully considering the findings from the inquest and any further recommendations made by the coroner." Mark remained firm in his feelings toward Skarner. "I have not forgiven her," he said. "People say it's good for your mental health to forgive, but I can't in this case. How dare she touch my daughter? How dare she put her hands on her?" Ileana Skarner later appealed her sentence, but the appeal was rejected. Lady Justice Macaulay noted there was sufficient evidence to conclude that Skarner understood her actions were wrong and had attempted to escape detention and flee the scene. Mark said he felt relief, though not joy, that the appeal had been denied. "She is manipulative and dangerous, and all three judges recognized that." He said Skarner remains in the secure care of Rampton High Security Hospital. Greater Manchester Mental Health NHS Trust, responsible for her care, conducted an internal review and stated, "We treat incidents of this kind with the utmost seriousness and have completed a rigorous internal review While the review identified areas for service improvement, it concluded that there were no clear indicators in Skarner's behavior that could have predicted this tragic outcome. NHS England disagreed, noting that by 2017 it was evident she was unwell and posed a risk to others. Their report criticized the Trust's understanding of risk management, saying, "Our most important finding is that the Trust's understanding of risk concepts was poor." Mark demanded an apology from the Trust. "It's absolute nonsense," he said. "They are just trying to relinquish responsibility. She was their responsibility. They knew she wasn't taking her medication properly, yet they allowed her to manage it herself. She was a ticking time bomb. The public needs to know what happened to my daughter. This is not about sympathy. It's about public outrage in the aftermath of Emily's death." Her school established a memorial and raised over £11,000. The head teacher expressed her amazement at the community support. Emily's friends helped design a memorial garden, reflecting her love of the outdoors, creating a space for reflection and remembrance. Mark also partnered with the charity 100 Families, which supports relatives of those killed by individuals with mental illness. Aiming to improve how patients are managed in the community, someone asked me, "What are you trying to achieve?" "It won't bring Emily back, no. It won't, but I don't want another family to go through what we endured. I don't want Emily's death to be in vain," he said. Sarah, Emily's mother, launched a GoFundMe campaign to support Bolton Lads and Girls Club, raising nearly £30,000. This initiative provided children with opportunities and a supportive environment, serving as a meaningful tribute to Emily for her devastated family and the wider community. Life will never be the same. Emily was a bright, kind-hearted child, with a life full of promise and joy, cut tragically short on a day meant for celebration. As her parents said, "Emily was the beat in our hearts, the spring in our step, the reason we got up every morning." Story 4. Before we move into our next case, a huge thank you to Melant TV for supporting our channel this week. Their platform allows us to explore more true crime documentaries. And this week we want to highlight Murder on the Internet. The series examines cases involving fake profiles, lies, and the dangers that can lurk behind screens, featuring first-hand interviews, police calls, CCTV, and interrogation footage. It provides an in-depth look at online deception and the criminal investigations that follow. Melant TV's true crime section is excellent, but the platform also offers a wide range of content covering history, space, science, and nature. Hours of new content are uploaded weekly, with curated playlists tailored to your interests. By clicking the link in our description, you can access a 30-day free trial at Tremagelant VM. Truly criminal to explore. Murder on the Internet and numerous other documentaries. Thank you again to Melant TV for supporting our channel. Garland, Texas, November 2011. Kelly Martin, 54, and her husband Don were preparing their home for the holiday season. Don, a police officer, and Kelly, a teacher, had been together since college and shared 2 daughters, Lauren and Caitlin, while retrieving boxers from the attic. Kelly lost her footing and fell from the ladder, instantly feeling a sharp pain in her back, initially hoping it was just a minor strain. She pushed through the holidays, but the pain persisted. Trip to her doctor revealed a herniated disc. Physical therapy, painkillers, and muscle relaxers failed to alleviate the pain, and her doctor recommended consulting a highly respected local neurosurgeon, Dr. Christopher Dunn, known for his skill and success. Dr. Dunn reassured Kelly and Don, describing the surgery as routine and straightforward, likely no longer than 45 minutes. Kelly asked him, "Have you ever had any bad outcomes or deaths in your surgeries?" Dr. Dunn replied, "No, knock on wood," confident in his care. They scheduled the operation for March 2012. Don waited in the hospital's waiting area, expecting the brief procedure to pass quickly, but as the minutes stretched into an hour, and then an hour and a half, concern began to grow. Finally, Dr. Dunn emerged, reporting on the surgery. Kelly Martin was awake after her surgery, moving slightly, but but clearly in severe pain. Dr. Dunn increased her medication and mentioned that she might need to be moved to the ICU for observation overnight, assuring Don she would be fine. Don, however, was told he couldn't see his wife as the team continued to work on her, a phrase that sent a chill down his spine. Trusting his instincts, he called their daughters, Lauren and Caitlin, telling them to come to the hospital immediately. 2 hours later, Dawn and the girls were still waiting, anxiety mounting with every passing minute. Suddenly, the ICU physician and Dr. Dunn, accompanied by the anesthesiologist, approached. The expressions on their faces immediately revealed the terrible truth before they even spoke in the words no one ever wants to hear. They were told, despite their efforts, Kelly Martin had died. Dawn recalled that Dr. Dunn never offered an explanation or even made eye contact. The ICU physician stated that a medical miscalculation during the surgery had caused her death. Records later revealed that during the operation, Kelly's blood pressure had plummeted, and she had turned gray after regaining consciousness. Briefly, she became agitated, thrashing her legs, which had developed splotches and discoloration, and the nurses had to sedate her. She never recovered. It was pure misery, Don said. My world just ended right there. He described the surge of rage and helplessness he felt, admitting he almost lunged at Dr. Dunn. In his anger, Caitlin described the scene as if it were happening in slow motion. Don requested scissors so he could keep a lock of Kelly's hair. A small connection to his wife. The family drove home in silence, shattered by grief. The medical examiner later confirmed that Kelly had bled to death internally after an artery was completely severed. Even as they mourned, Don, Lauren, and Caitlin felt something was off. They couldn't shake the sense that the full story wasn't being told, and as tragic as Kelly's death was, it was only the beginning. Soon, a larger and more troubling story would emerge. To understand how this could happen, it helps to look back. Christopher Daniel Dunn, born in 1971 in Montana, had initially aspired to a career in football. Teammates remembered him as struggling with basic drills and having difficulty following instructions. Yet he showed relentless persistence in practice after multiple transfers and the realization that his eligibility to play professionally was lost. Dunn abruptly changed course, turning to medicine. By 1995, he had earned his undergraduate degree and his MD from the University of Memphis. He excelled academically, joining the Alpha Omega Medical Honor Society and collaborating on research projects with Russian scientists, securing $3 million in funding his surgical residency at the University of Tennessee. Saw him running 2 labs simultaneously. Colleagues described him as charming, witty, and ambitious, with a glowing 12-page CV that impressed many. But beneath this facade, cracks were forming. His CV claimed a doctorate in microbiology from St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, a program that didn't exist at the time, and a PhD from the University of Tennessee Health Center, which the university could not verify. Dunn had also struggled with substance abuse since college, but during his residency, his drug use escalated dramatically. He frequently used LSD, cocaine, and illegally obtained prescription painkillers. Initially, his ex-girlfriend Megan thought his drug use was occasional, but it became clear it was pervasive. Even after a full night of drinking and taking drugs, he would show up for work, scrubs in hand, ready to treat patients. Cocaine was his drug of choice, supplemented with OxyContin, Xanax, and alcohol during come-downs. Friends recounted that he often started his day with vodka, orange juice, and a line of cocaine. Some nurses even observed him using cocaine immediately before entering surgery, something Dunn jokingly referred to as his neurostimulants, believing it enhanced his alertness. These binges were extreme and often lasted all night until the next morning, only to be followed by a full day of surgical work. When concerns arose and he was asked to take a drug test, he refused and was subsequently enrolled in an impaired physician program. In depositions, he appeared slurred, disoriented, and far from competent during depositions. Dunn repeatedly invoked his Fifth Amendment rights, refusing to answer questions about using drugs while treating patients. When asked directly if he had ever been under the influence of cocaine while caring for someone, he continuously responded, "I take the fifth, I take the fifth, I take the fifth," despite mounting complaints. His refusal to participate in drug tests, and having completed fewer than 100 surgeries far below the typical residency requirement of around 1,000, he was still allowed to finish his residency in 2011, soon after. He was recruited to the Minimally Invasive Spine Institute in North Dallas, receiving a $600,000 signing bonus. He was also granted surgical privileges at Baylor Regional Medical Center in Plano with a salary of $50,000 per month. Recommendations accompanying his hiring emphasized his brilliance and work ethic, noting, "He was possibly the hardest working person I have ever met. Hospitals often grant surgical privileges to high-revenue surgeons," which explains how Dunn was able to quickly secure multiple positions across Dallas, despite his limited experience within months of finishing his training. Dunn met another surgeon, Dr. Randall Kirby, who would play a key role in the unfolding story. Their first conversation left Kirby taken aback. Dunn confidently declared he was the best surgeon in Dallas, the only one patients could trust, and that he was determined to clean the town up, delivering his statement with aggressive certainty. Other doctors noted similar displays of arrogance, but initially attributed it to his confidence in his surgical skill. However, opinions shifted quickly. Dunn's first and only surgery at the Minimally Invasive Spine Institute went catastrophically wrong. Following the operation, he left for Las Vegas to party, abandoning the patient in distress. His drug use continued unchecked, and he frequently sent long, erratic emails to his ex-girlfriend and surgical assistant, Kimberly. These messages contained rambling threats, profanities, and references to his drug and alcohol abuse. In one email, he wrote, "I really am building an empire. Anyone close to me thinks I am something between God, Einstein, and the Antichrist, because how can I do everything? I want and cross every discipline boundary, like it's a playground, and never lose. I am ready to leave the love and kindness and patience that I mix with everything else and become a cold-blooded killer." These emails, though too extensive to read in full, offer a chilling insight into Dunn's mindset and have been linked in the description for those who wish to examine them in detail. December 2011, shortly before Kelly Martin's surgery, Dunn had already left a trail of harm. His first patient in North Texas, Ken Fennell, underwent back surgery that failed to relieve his pain because Dunn had operated in the wrong area. Dunn admitted the error, but promised to correct it with a second surgery after waking from the second operation. Ken described his legs as feeling like a bonfire. The surgery had gone terribly wrong, leaving him reliant on a motorized wheelchair. Dunn's next patient, Lee Passmoran, investigator with the Collin County Medical Examiner's Office, had undergone back surgery previously but still suffered ongoing pain. Recommended to see Dunn by his specialist, Lee went into surgery, accompanied by vascular surgeon Mark High. High watched in horror as Dunn began cutting a ligament surrounding the spinal cord, something that should never have been touched. Lee started bleeding heavily, turning the operating room into a lake of red. According to High, Dunn left hardware in Lee's spine and even stripped a screw, rendering it immovably unable to continue watching. High physically blocked the incision area and warned Dunn, "We need to talk about this. That's dangerous. Even that attitude is dangerous. I've done 5,000 of these and I've never seen this done before." But Dunn ignored the warning. High left the room and vowed never to work with him again. Though Lee survived, he was left with chronic pain and significant difficulties walking and maintaining balance. Barry Morguloff was the next patient to have his life irreparably altered. Barry, a truck loader, had chronic back pain and, despite apprehension, chose Dunn, based on his glowing reputation and charm. Meeting him in person, Barry felt reassured by Dunn's confident and disarming manner, believing him to be a skilled family man. In January 2012, Barry entered surgery with vascular assistance, unaware of the devastating consequences that awaited him. Dunn's surgical assistant, during one particularly harrowing operation was none other than Dr. Randall Kirby later described the procedure as probably the easiest thing a neurosurgeon does on a daily basis yet. As he watched, Dunn plunged in without using the proper tools, blindly grabbing at structures he should never have touched, and moving in a careless, haphazard manner. Kirby initially argued with Dunn, but when that failed, he politely offered to take over the surgery. Dunn refused, insisting he knew exactly what he was doing. Kirby left the operating room, but the uneasy feeling he had about Dunn from the very first meeting lingered. Barry Morguloff, the patient, awoke from the surgery in excruciating pain. Unlike anything he had experienced before, bone fragments had been left inside his spinal canal, causing severe ongoing damage. A later attempt by another surgeon to repair the harm could only do so much. Barry now walks with a cane, and his doctors warned that he will eventually require a wheelchair. The physical agony was compounded by mental anguish, and Barry briefly contemplated ending his life. Thankfully, the support of his wife and children, along with intensive therapy, helped him begin to recover. Dunn's next patient was his childhood friend and roommate, Jerry Summers, who had a herniated disc. Trusting Dunn implicitly, Jerry underwent what was supposed to be a routine procedure instead. Dunn damaged Jerry's vertebral artery, causing uncontrollable bleeding. He then injected excessive anticoagulants, compressing Jerry's spine. Jerry woke up paralyzed, unable to feel his arms or legs, and required 24/7 care and despair. He pleaded with his girlfriend, "Kill me, I want to die." Dunn never visited Jerry, explained the situation, or offered support. Jerry later told nurses he suspected Dunn had been using cocaine before the surgery, though he later admitted this was an assumption. But the claim prompted the hospital to order a drug test. Dunn never completed it, claiming he got lost on the way. Despite this, he passed a psychological evaluation and, just 3 weeks later, was allowed to operate again, albeit restricted to minor procedures. This brings us to Kelly Martin, Dunn's next patient following her death. He was again ordered to undergo drug testing. The first test came back as diluted with water, while the second test days later returned clean. Meanwhile, Lee Passmore, still struggling with the aftermath of his own surgery, received effects that stunned him. At the top of the page were two names, Kelly Martin and Christopher Dunn. As he read the details of Kelly's case, the connections became horrifyingly clear. Reviewing Dunn's educational history, Lee noticed several months unaccounted for, years that did not align with standard medical training. You don't get to walk away from 2 to 3 years of residency or internship, take months off, and then resume your position as if nothing happened, he remarked. Day when the Texas Medical Board issued a temporary suspension of Dunn's license, citing imminent risk to public health and impairment by drugs or alcohol. Mary A. Ford, one of Dunn's former patients, claimed in her lawsuit that she had suffered permanent nerve damage due to his negligence, despite being on maximum pain medication. She prayed daily for relief. Kelly Martin, the 54-year-old mother of 2 and wife of a Garland police officer who died from massive internal bleeding, was also cited in the suspension order. Dunn had previously held surgical privileges at multiple North Texas hospitals, most recently at University General Hospital in Dallas, but these had been revoked. Temporary suspensions are intended as rapid measures when a doctor poses immediate danger. The physician will later have the opportunity to defend themselves in a series of hearings, which can take weeks or longer. Dunn, through a lawyer, attempted to appeal, claiming he had no time to use drugs or drink due to his workload. He threatened to sue Dr. Kirby for slander and alleged a conspiracy to extract money from hospitals where he had practiced. When asked about the delay in suspending him, the head of the Texas Medical Board explained, "It's not uncommon for there to be complications. In neurosurgery, none of us rushed to judgment. That wouldn't be fair to suspend a physician's license. There must be a pattern of patient injury," which is ultimately what was established by June 2013. Dunn, when confronted about his surgeries and the description of him as a serial killer, responded vaguely that he would address it later, and affirmed his intention to practice medicine again for Doctors Henderson and Kirby. Suspension alone was insufficient. They feared Dunn could eventually return together with another physician. They contacted the district attorney, urging criminal investigation, but initially, nothing happened by December 2013. Nearly 2 years after Kelly Martin's death, the medical board permanently revoked Dunn's license, financially ruined. Dunn filed for bankruptcy, owing over $1 million, and moved to Colorado to live with his parents. Making occasional visits to his 2 young sons, his relationship with his girlfriend, Wendy, reportedly fell apart. His personal life spiraled further. Shortly after relocating, he was pulled over in the early morning hours for driving on the wrong side of the road with 2 flat tires. The officer noted a strong smell of alcohol and empty bottles in the car. Dunn was arrested for DUI and ordered into rehab in March 2014. He was taken into psychiatric care after being found banging on the doors of a Dallas bank with blood on his hands and face, incoherently claiming his family was in danger later. He was arrested for shoplifting at a Dallas Walmart, attempting to steal nearly $1,000 worth of watches, sunglasses, electronics, and cologne. He bagged the items to hide them, tried on clothes in the dressing room, and headed for the exit before security stopped him. His life had become completely unmanageable. Baylor Plano faced multiple lawsuits from former patients, including Ken Fennell, Lee Passmore, Mary Ford, and Barry Merlo. The hospital described the situation as extremely frustrating and difficult, insisting they never knowingly allowed one individual to compromise their standards of care. Jeff Glidewell, still struggling with his injuries, but determined to seek justice, contacted a judge with the details of Dunn's misconduct. This action finally brought the case back to the attention of the district attorney, setting the stage for a formal criminal investigation at this point. Michelle Sugarette, an assistant district attorney with 13 years of experience in Dallas, became involved. She had never prosecuted a doctor before, making this case particularly compelling. From the start, it seemed that no one had ever prosecuted a surgeon for what they had done in the operating room. Making this case groundbreaking in multiple ways, Michelle Sugarette, the assistant district attorney, began an exhaustive investigation into Dunn. Compiling a staggering amount of evidence, she issued 800 subpoenas and interviewed over 100 people in person. In July 2015, 46-year-old Christopher Dunn was arrested on 5 counts of aggravated assault and 1 count of injury to an elderly person. Mary A. Ford, he was accused of maiming 3 patients and causing the deaths of at least 2 news outlets reported that Dunn, a North Texas neurosurgeon, faced charges for butchering patients and botched surgeries that left 5 Dallas area patients either dead or permanently injured victims, and their attorneys alleged that Dunn had built a resume of botched surgeries, leaving paralyzed patients in his wake. In one case, during Lee Passmore's surgery, an assisting surgeon had to physically restrain Dunn after recognizing his actions as both inexplicable and extremely dangerous. Other patients shared similarly harrowing stories. Dunn's former roommate, Jerry Summers, would never walk again due to injuries sustained during surgery. Hospital staff testified that Dunn had a gallon jug of vodka under his desk, and that a baggie of white powder had been found in his bathroom. Dunn was taken into custody on $600,000 bond and pleaded not guilty to all charges in Texas. The charge of injury to an elderly person carries a potential life sentence. The prosecution was racing against the statute of limitations, which had only 4 months remaining for this particular charge. Civil malpractice cases, they knew, were often not worth pursuing because the potential outcomes rarely justified the time and expense. Their primary goal, criminally charging Dunn, was to secure a sentence long enough to ensure he could never practice medicine again. Ultimately, Dunn was criminally charged for the maiming of Mary Ford, and this case went to trial. Once a rising star in neurosurgery, Dunn now faced felony charges and the possibility of permanent incarceration. Civil attorney James Gerards, representing one of Dunn's former patients, noted how rare it is for a district attorney to pursue criminal charges against a physician, as the medical community often rallies to defend them. However, Dunn's actions were so egregious that they could not be ignored. Since 2013, Dunn had been traveling between Dallas and Colorado, where he was on probation for a DWI, and he had little legal representation for the new charges. Requests for a jailhouse interview went unanswered. The trial was expected to last several weeks and raised complex legal questions. Can grossly negligent or intentionally harmful surgical acts rise above malpractice and constitute criminal behavior? That determination rested with the jury. Dunn chose not to testify in his own defense. The prosecution relied on extensive witness testimony spanning the years prior to Mary Ford's surgery. Drs. Randall Kirby and Robert Henderson testified, as did Jerry Summers via video link from his home. Mary herself took the stand, displaying photographs of her back and describing the scar tissue, her inability to move her legs, and the excruciating pain she endured. She recounted thinking, "Something is wrong. I've never felt pain like this before. It was a 10+. I said, he will never touch me again." The prosecution argued that Dunn had knowingly, intentionally, and recklessly harmed at least 15 patients, although the true number of affected individuals was likely much higher. Jeff Cheney, another victim, awoke from surgery to find himself permanently impaired, adding to the mounting evidence of Dunn's systematic negligence and disregard for human life. Patients suffered devastating consequences from Dunn's surgeries. Jack Cheney had part of his spinal cord removed by mistake, leaving the entire right side of his body paralyzed. Jacqueline Troy lost the ability to speak after Dunn damaged her vocal cords. Philip Mayfield was paralyzed from the neck down. Marshall Muse spiraled into addiction after relying on pain medication following his surgery. And Pam Trusty considers herself lucky to be alive. Dunn's defense team, however, argued that he was not a criminal, merely a careless and poorly trained surgeon. They claimed he didn't knowingly put patients at risk. His mistakes were due to chaotic operating rooms and hospital systems, not malicious intent. As for his alarming emails to his ex-girlfriend, Kimberly, where he referred to becoming a killer, the defense insisted these were sarcastic remarks, taken out of context. During the trial, defense attorneys attempted to portray Dunn as an inexperienced, inadequately trained surgeon. The prosecution countered that he could not have carried out these surgeries without the support and enabling of major hospitals and other doctors, all of whom profited while patients suffered. Is it fair for him to be thrown away when so many others share responsibility? Asked one expert. Yet the scale and nature of Dunn's errors were beyond accidental or minor mistakes. His actions demonstrated a staggering level of recklessness. Dr. Robert Henderson, called in to correct Mary A. Ford's surgery, described the procedure as an atrocity and questioned Dunn's qualifications, saying he became concerned that Dunn might not even be a legitimate surgeon. Dunn's attorneys acknowledged his mistakes, but argued prosecutors could not prove they were intentional, reckless, or knowing. One lead attorney summarized, "You have people in walkers, on crutches, barely able to move. You have people who lost loved ones before we even get to Mary. It's already downhill, so why didn't he stop?" Michelle Sugarette, the ADA, explained that greed and a lack of conscience were likely motivations. Dunn owed large sums of money, desired a luxurious lifestyle, and ignored the human cost of his actions in court. Dunn remained calm, and his lawyer stated he genuinely believed he was performing well until experts testified to the damage he had caused. Dr. Henderson described the surgery. "This is not providing any stability at elbowbone fragments lying over the exposed dura on the left side." The jury deliberated for just 4 hours and returned a unanimous verdict. Christopher Daniel Dunn was guilty. In July 2016, he was convicted of intentionally or knowingly causing serious bodily harm to an elderly individual. Dunn's family pleaded for leniency, describing him as a bright child who loved animals and had always wanted to help people. His father acknowledged that Dunn had lost everything: his family, career, companies, and medical license, and had tried to compensate by working harder. As his life unraveled, the jury sentenced Dunn to life in prison, with a minimum term of 30 years in February 2017. Victims and families expressed relief and a sense of justice, though the verdict could not undo the suffering endured. Dunn's legal team planned to appeal. An attempt in 2018 was unsuccessful. He will not be eligible for parole until 2045. At age 7 for this case set a historic precedent. It was the first time in the United States that a physician was criminally convicted for actions taken during the practice of medicine. In response, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed HB 198 in June 2023, granting the state's medical board additional powers to protect patients from dangerous doctors. The law strengthens oversight, including criminal penalties for falsifying license applications, prohibiting doctors with revoked or suspended licenses in other states from practicing in Texas, requiring fingerprinting and background checks, and enforcing monthly monitoring through the National Practitioner Data Bank. The civil cases against the 4 hospitals that employed Dunn continue alarmingly. In 2011, 47% of hospitals failed to report restrictions or revocations of doctors' clinical privileges, leaving gaps in accountability. The Dunn case highlighted systemic failures in healthcare oversight, emphasizing the urgent need for transparency and stricter enforcement from the top levels of hospital administration. Hospital officials initially allowed Christopher Dunn to leave quietly, rather than firing him or launching an immediate investigation. They issued a statement saying, "Our primary concern, as always, is with patients. Out of respect for the patients and families involved, and given the privileged nature of many details, we must continue to limit our comments. There is nothing more important to us than serving our community through high-quality, trusted healthcare." Between May 2011 and June 2013, Dunn performed surgery on 38 patients, leaving 32 with life-altering injuries, some completely paralyzed, and resulting in the deaths of 2. His story gained widespread attention, inspiring a highly successful podcast and a Peacock TV series titled Dr. Death, featuring Joshua Jackson as Dunn and Christian Slater as Dr. Randall Kirby. The extraordinary efforts of Doctors Kirby and Henderson were critical in bringing Dunn's dangerous career to an end. Without their persistence, who knows how many more patients might have suffered. Tragically, a 3rd victim, Jerry Summers, a former patient and friend of Dunn, died in 2021 from an infection linked to a botched surgery. Patients place immense trust in doctors, expecting them to use their knowledge and authority to care for and protect them. For the families affected by Dunn's actions, that trust was irrevocably broken. Kelly Martin's husband, Don, reflected, "My whole lifestyle has changed. Everything is different now. I look at life completely differently. Life is too precious, too short. We can't take the little things for granted." Story 5. Jennifer Cronin and her family. Essex, England. Jennifer Cronin was a devoted, glamorous, and sociable mother who shared a close bond with her daughter, Susan. In 1990, Susan met Kieran Lynch, a bricklayer, 3 years her senior. Susan's friends said Kieran seemed to worship the ground she walked on, and the couple appeared perfect together. Kieran got along well with Susan's parents, and the couple went on to have 2 daughters, Matilda and Molly, who were very close to their grandparents. Matilda recalled her father as generous and loving, but also deeply competitive, controlling, and obsessed with maintaining the image of a perfect family. Kieran struggled to cope with stress and often expressed it through anger, especially when under the influence of alcohol. One daughter remembered vivid episodes of screaming, shouting, and smashed plates, though Kieran would often apologize the next day. Susan was ashamed and embarrassed, reluctant to share the abuse with anyone. Matilda added, "We weren't even able to let the dog outside. I was really frightened if my dad went for my mom. I would step in. I felt protective over her." His personality could flip in an instant. By 2015, Kieran's behavior had become more withdrawn and erratic. He sometimes failed to show up for work, and Susan discovered he had run up around 3,000 pounds in cash withdrawals on a credit card, normally reserved for large purchases. When she confronted him, he became defensive and hostile during laundry. Susan found a small straw of cocaine in his pocket. She confronted him, saying, "No one and nothing makes you choose that _ you chose that over your family." He replied, "Please don't tell the girls it's drugs." Kieran's volatility escalated. On one occasion, he held a knife to Susan's throat, threatening a murder-suicide, and on another, he rigged a noose in their loft over a series of tense messages. Susan expressed her desire to turn back time, but it became clear their lives were headed in different directions in November 2016. After 24 years of marriage, Susan made the difficult decision to separate. Prioritizing the safety of her daughters, Kieran moved back in with his parents, and life at home became calmer. Susan began to rebuild her life and eventually started a relationship with a man named Mike. Over time, she confided in him about her past with Kieran and her need to finalize the divorce. To do so, she had to inform Kieran and arranged a meeting at McDonald's at 6:30 p.m., knowing Kieran's unpredictable and volatile nature. Susan faced a highly stressful and potentially dangerous situations. Surprisingly, Kieran initially appeared to take the news of Susan's desire for a divorce calmly. Susan described the conversation as amicable, and Kieran even sent her a text saying, "I'm glad you have found someone." She replied that she hoped he would find someone too. However, appearances were deceiving. The following day, Kieran sent a series of hostile texts. "I don't care what you do. It's your life. Who am I to say? Give me 60K, and I am gone from your life for good." Susan asked, "What about being a dad? Are you going to pay maintenance and still see the girls?" Kieran responded aggressively, dismissing any responsibility and even implying violence. The situation quickly escalated. Susan called Essex police, saying, "My ex-husband is outside my house, threatening to get in." She described him as wielding a hammer, smashing windows and doors, and behaving violently. Officers rushed to the scene as Susan hid, along with her dog, in a part of the house with no lock. Kieran's cousin, Lisa, arrived to help and witnessed him carrying a hammer in one hand and a drill in the other. He told her to leave it alone, insisting the situation didn't involve her. Eventually, Kieran drove away, and the police arrived shortly after. Kieran soon returned, screaming threats to kill Susan. He was arrested on 3 charges: possession of an offensive weapon, threats to kill, and criminal damage. The threats to kill allegation was debated, as some argued his text about having her killed might have been hypothetical. The weapon charge was complicated because, as a builder, he legitimately had tools like the hammer in his van. Proving unlawful possession was difficult. He was therefore charged with criminal damage. Instead, Kieran denied the allegations at Southend Magistrates Court on January 29, 2018. With a trial scheduled for March 29, he was released on strict bail conditions: no contact with Susan and no visiting her street. Susan called the charges a farce, unable to believe he was being charged merely with criminal damage even after his release. Kieran continued harassing Susan. Within 12 hours, she called police again, reporting that he had attempted suicide by tying a belt around his neck and placing a plastic bag over his head. A mental health team and police responded, but Kieran claimed he was fine and was advised to contact his GP despite his bail conditions. Kieran repeatedly contacted Susan, leaving her terrified. He falsely claimed that Mike, Susan's partner, was sending gloating messages about their relationship. He even sent coded messages to his daughter, purporting them to be Mike's vehicle registration, and demanded she relay them. Kieran's harassment escalated further. He sent incessant, taunting messages to Susan. "You and the girls have everything. I will always have my memories. Have you forgotten? Not money, I suppose. Thanks for everything. A true lady. Enjoy." Often accompanied by emojis. He would make up to 80 calls a day, completely ignoring the conditions of his bail. Susan's fear extended to her children, as she worried Kieran might harm them. Her mother, Jennifer, also became increasingly anxious, fearing Kieran might be taunting them by demonstrating how close he could get to their home. On March 7, 2018, Susan's partner, Mike, saw a man entering their garage and spotted a silver van in the driveway. The man later cut the electricity to the house, and Kieran sent gloating messages, further escalating the harassment. Despite all of this, the police had yet to take decisive action, leaving Susan and her family in a state of constant fear despite repeated assurances that he would be arrested. Detective Superintendent Stephen Jennings, lead for stalking and harassment at Essex Police, later admitted in a documentary that, because the police received hundreds of calls daily and no direct threats of violence had been made, the situation was initially assessed as low-risk. Staff were therefore not deployed. In hindsight, Jennings acknowledged that this was a failure to recognize the true severity of the stalking. Susan said, "Every time I called, someone came to take a statement. It would take hours, and they promised to sort it out, but nothing ever happened. Each call felt like an entirely new case, so the police never built a complete picture of how badly things were escalating. Basic steps, like recording the presence of children in the home, which should have prioritized our case, were never done." On March 11, Kieran conducted an internet search for the most flammable liquids the following day. He called Susan's home, where one of their daughters answered. He laughed upon learning that police were looking for him, and, for the first time, extended his threats to the child, saying he would harm them. Distressed, the daughter called the police. "My dad keeps threatening he's going to come to the house. He's constantly harassing us. He said he's going to us up. He's going to kill us. And he's harassing my nan. My nan's elderly. We've already reported it, but he keeps coming outside our house." Kieran was then added to the police national computer as wanted. Officers first searched his address on Chuck's Road in Canvey, but did not find him in the meantime. The daughters were advised not to stay at the house. One went to a friend's home, and the other to Jennifer. Susan's mother, Jennifer, and her granddaughter watched television together before bed. But when the lights went out, the house phone immediately rang. The granddaughter called the police in terror. Seeing Kieran in the garden, Jennifer locked herself in her bedroom at 1:50 a.m. Susan called Essex Police. "My husband is constantly calling all night. He's harassing my mom and my daughter. There's a warrant out for him, but I am so worried he's in the house. I'm absolutely petrified." Despite multiple calls, the police said they lacked the manpower to respond immediately. They advised unplugging the phones, but Kieran's abusive and cruel texts continued, even referencing Susan's late father. "Thanks hope you see your dad soon. Kiss at 4:10 a.m. He sent another text, simply a single kiss. By March 13th, Kieran continued his harassment. One daughter woke to a text from him, "I love you no matter what they say. Kiss." She did not reply that morning. Police reassessed the case, downgrading it from high risk to medium risk, meaning there was still potential for serious harm, though it might not be imminent. Jennifer remained locked in her bedroom, terrified, while her granddaughter, who had spent the night, left the house. Susan went to be with her mother, letting herself in and locking the door behind her. Determined not to be bullied, she stayed vigilant, watching Jennifer and the dog from the window as she made tea. Susan called Kieran's employer to see if he knew his whereabouts, but received no information. She then received a call from the police about the ongoing investigation. Suddenly, at 10:48 a.m., Kieran appeared at the property, panicked. Susan called 999. "I'm in the woods. Min lost. Where is she?" "He's in the garden with her." "My mom. Is she conscious and breathing?" "I don't know. Her name." "Jennifer. Jennifer Cronin. Is anyone with her?" "Oh my God. Me mom's dead. He killed my mom. He set her on fire." Kieran, engulfed in flames, ran toward Jennifer, screaming, swearing, and acting abusively. He carried a knife and a petrol can, dousing Jennifer in fuel As she screamed and cowered, Susan ran down the road, calling for help. When she reached the bottom, 2 neighbors warned her, "Don't go back, there are 2 burned bodies." Kieran had set both himself and Jennifer on fire. Susan immediately returned to the house. Jennifer had suffered horrific burns. She had lost her hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes, and her face and hands were badly charred despite her injuries. She was able to speak to Susan, expressing her love and concern for her granddaughters. Susan stayed with her mother, reassuring her, "I'm here, Mom, you're going to be all right." Kieran had also suffered severe burns. Slumped against a wall in the garden, Susan described him as red raw and struggling to breathe, and realized he was dying from his injuries. Emergency services, including fire, ambulance, and air ambulance teams, arrived promptly. Kieran was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder, and both he and Jennifer were taken to hospital investigations. Later revealed that Kieran had purchased a bucket and fuel prior to the attack, 2 hours after the incident. Susan was questioned. She recalled that she initially saw flames but could not remember the exact location. Her mother, Jennifer, reassured her that she was going to be okay. Despite her devastating injuries, Kieran had deliberately poured petrol over himself and 72-year-old Jennifer in the garden during a bitter divorce. Hospital staff told Susan that Kieran was unlikely to survive the night due to 97% burns across his body. For Kieran's daughters, it was an unbearable ordeal. One daughter expressed a desperate wish to say goodbye and convey her love. Kieran died that evening. A toxicology report later showed alcohol and cocaine in his system. Jennifer was admitted to Broomfield Hospital's burns unit, with burns covering 33% of her body, primarily on her upper torso and head, due to the severity of her injuries. Reconstructive surgery was impossible, and she was placed on end-of-life care. She endured 17 days of suffering before passing away on March 30, 2018, at 1:32 p.m. Surrounded by family, the post-mortem confirmed her death resulted from complications caused by the burns inflicted by Kieran, an act meant to deliberately harm Susan and punish her emotionally. On January 21, 2019, a week-long inquest opened at County Hall Chambers in Chelmsford. Susan initially focused her anger on Kieran, but as evidence emerged of police failures, her frustration shifted toward the authorities. Her partner, Mike, spoke about the fear and stress caused by Kieran's unpredictable behavior. The inquest concluded that Jennifer had been unlawfully killed and that Kieran died by suicide. It also identified police mismanagement as a contributing factor. Susan stated, "It doesn't bring my mom back or their dad, but things definitely need to be looked at. They are supposed to protect and serve, and they didn't do that for us." For Susan, the police failures meant Jennifer's death could have been prevented. Officers did not respond effectively to repeated warnings or escalating threats. Despite clear signs of danger, the inquest highlighted 5 areas of police failings, including delays in attempting to arrest Kieran. Following these findings, some officers received management training on record-keeping and information processing, though no misconduct charges were filed. In March 2019, the Independent Office for Police Conduct criticized the police for inaction, inadequate responses to bail breaches, and a failure to recognize Kieran's behavior as stalking and domestic abuse. A domestic homicide review echoed these concerns. Subsequently, Susan initiated legal action against the police, seeking accountability for their failures. She said, "I want the police to take proper responsibility. This could have been prevented if they had done their jobs properly. I've been left a single mom with no support." It's been held. Detective Superintendent Stephen Jennings later met with Susan and issued a formal apology. Detective Superintendent Stephen Jennings personally invited Susan to speak with the new police teams, saying, "We are a far stronger force than we were 5 years ago." In every way, Mike reflected on the lasting impact of the trauma, saying, "Susan often suffers from flashbacks, waking up screaming and crying. The absolute horror she and her family endured is almost impossible to put into words. Susan described the ordeal, saying, "Watching my mom get burned alive by my ex-husband, and being powerless to stop, it was unimaginably disturbing. She didn't deserve such a painful and traumatic death. Mom still had so many years ahead, and so much love to give her grandchildren. My poor girls will have to carry this with them forever. Though thankfully they also have wonderful memories of the father he used to be," she continued. Finding the words to close a case like this is nearly impossible. The trail of devastation and destruction left behind is unfathomable. Jennifer Cronin should still be here, enjoying life and spending time with the people she loved most. Her life was ended in a way far too horrific to imagine. And for those left behind, life will never be the same when we lose someone we love. We must hold on to the good memories and the happy times, and hope that, in time, healing is possible. As the rain fell softly and the night deepened, Crime Whispers reminds us that true crime stories not only uncover life's darkest mysteries, but also serve as a cautionary tale too. Remain vigilant, let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep, and until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.